Testing. We in there? All right. We're good to go.
Boys to make matzah out of their blood. There were lynchings in the American South, where African Americans were accused of, raping a woman, and based on just a rumor spreading, and then they'd be tortured and hanged. There's the McCarthy era. There was the daycare satanic ritual abuse mania of the 1980s, where these daycare workers were accused basically by coaching kids to embellish these fantastic stories of how they were sexually molested and tortured and forced to take part in satanic rituals. I mean, all totally nonsense. And people went to jail.
Yeah.
So an interesting question is, how do people kind of lose their collective minds every once in a while in history? And part of the answer is, if you start a kind of vicious circle of denouncing people and then denouncing people who don't denounce people.
Yes.
Or denouncing people who call the whistle on other people denouncing people, then you can get a kind of circle of terror where everyone is so afraid of being denounced that they want to denounce first. Yeah. Stalinist Soviet Union is another example, and Maoist China, and that's somehow.
Hi, I'm Dan Martell, serial entrepreneur, investor, and creator of SaaS Academy. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to demo your SaaS product so you can get customers buying.
Right, whatever you say.
I was raised in the Methodist Church, and my parents, after they retired from their legitimate careers, both became Methodist ministers. I never felt much in the way of a connection to the religion, but I played along as a kid because it seemed to be the thing to do. Once I got out of the house and was free to think for myself and make my own decisions, the one thing that I struggled with was this idea that it was somehow disrespectful or dangerous to question. And I remember very distinctly reaching the point in my life where I said, well, any God that I would be willing to worship couldn't possibly have a problem with me taking a good, long, hard, careful, critical look at what I was being told and at the evidence around me and making up my mind. And it was like within the next 3 days I was an atheist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because there was nothing behind it.
So you felt no anchorage in the religion. You felt no anchorage that there was a God.
Anchorage. I'm not even sure what you mean by that. I had no
like
strong emotional connection to it.
You had no sound proof.
Well, no.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't mean to sound disrespectful in any way, but but I honestly think that that's speaking out of ignorance.
Okay.
Because if you read in the Bible, which is about the book of life for Christians or anybody that believes in God, there are numerous occasions where God has allowed people to question Him. It's now I know
Oh,
you
sure.
know as
No. I think you misunderstand me. I'm not saying that I think necessarily that the Christian religion says you shouldn't question. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But a lot of people that I knew who were religious had that attitude. Right? And I did feel personally, whether it was from the religion or not, I did feel personally like there was some threat or fear or danger or something there that I had to get past, right? Wherever that came from, I'm not going to blame Christianity for it.
Right.
I'm just saying, once I did get past it, it's really obvious to me that there was no God within just a few days.
Oh, okay. Well, on that note, actually, when I asked you all, had you ever been exposed to God? You told me that both of you told me about the church that you grew up in and that you were raised in the church. I'm not going to say I'm a biblical scholar or anything close to it, but I have my own study. You know, I studied it too for myself. And in all my studies, I found out that going to church is not always an exposure to God. In fact, it could be a bigger hindrance from God than it is to an exposure, because, as you know, everybody talks about it, you find most of the funniest things, most of the most critical things, most critical people.
So are you going back to the idea of more of a personal experience?
No, not a personal experience, because God, I'm not going to say God doesn't speak to everybody, but you got to be really blessed for something like that to happen. You know what I'm saying? I'm a minister, and that I've never had nothing.
Well, okay. I mean, it could be that there's a God that only reveals Himself to certain blessed people. Doesn't change a thing for us.
Right. Okay.
As far as we're concerned, we look at those people and say, they're claiming these things that don't seem to have any basis in reality. We see no reason to take them seriously, so we don't.
Okay, but my thing of this is, the Bible actually says, it says, try God. It says the Bible in the actual words, it says taste and see.
Okay, but the problem there is that we have the Bible is leather bound, got some pages in it. There are millions of books out there that have the same amount of evidence to back them up.
Right.
Including, any fiction book that you care to pick up. We have no reason to believe that this one is any more special than any of the other books out there. So until I get some evidence saying that this God in this Bible is true and real, then I'm not going to take its claims and follow its instructions any more than I'm going to say that I should be jumping down rabbit holes looking for the Queen of Spades to, bring me to a tea
Hearts,
party.
man. It's the Queen of Hearts.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're Alice in Wonderland.
Sorry. Well, to go looking for, rabbits to have dinner parties with. So,
yeah, okay.
Tea parties with, so.
So you have to. Well, I assume that you take the scientific route of us being in our existence and all of this, right?
Try to. I mean, it depends on what you mean by the scientific route, but we see that science has explained a lot in this world and has explained how planets got here, how life evolved, stuff like that. So chances are it's a good thing to rely on to make decisions on.
Okay. My thing about it is this: even if we take the scientific route and we believe that somehow, I'm not going to knock it. Like I said, I don't like to knock things, but if there was some kind of explosion that created the planets, or some kind of who created it, there ultimately has to be some creator.
Yeah.
No, why?
Because things just don't appear. Science has never explained something just appearing from nowhere.
But what about the Creator Himself?
The Creator himself.
If things don't appear from nowhere, where'd the Creator come from?
But you can't look at the Creator as a thing, because the Creator is obviously more than a thing.
Well, maybe the universe is more than a thing.
Well,
if the universe is more than a thing, then it's off the hook for having to have been created just like your God is. And so what you do when you bring in a God to explain it is you violate a principle called, this is a rational principle called Occam's razor, which says if you don't make up additional details to put into your explanation that aren't needed. And once you've admitted that there can be something that doesn't have an origin, right, that didn't get created,
Right.
once you admitted that there can be such a something, then there's no reason that the universe can't be that something. You don't have to put a God in there. Putting a God in is just an extra step that's completely unnecessary.
True.
So
Okay.
there you go.
Well, this is my thing about it. Is okay. Even if that is true, then I mean, where does the power? Even looking at science, science says that sleep is a stage of death. Science says that.
What?
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 Sleep is a stage of death. It's like one of the early stages of death. When you're sleeping, that is a stage of death. It's not death. But
I'm not familiar with this, and I
Yeah.
need some citation from scientific literature to accept that. But
you can look it up.
okay,
But
go on.
okay. Now, assuming that I'm true for the conversation's sake.
Sure. For the sake of it.
Okay, then where does, if it's a stage of death, do you believe we have the power to wake from the dead? Do you believe that we have the power to raise the dead by a shake? You know?
Not yet, but medical science is coming along.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
again,
really. I mean, I'm very hopeful that medical science will solve this annoying aging and dying problem that we're facing, that evolution has foisted on us.
Well, I mean, okay, I'm sure, because most people that don't believe in God have a thorough knowledge of the Word, the Bible. Most of them do. I mean, because I've ran into people who don't believe in God, but they can tell me more scriptures than I know as one of his closest followers, or, a minister.
Okay.
So, if you looked at the Word, do you read the book of Revelations, which I'm sure you probably get this a lot?
I have read bits of the Bible, including bits of that.
Revelation.
I will not claim to have read the whole thing straight through. I haven't.
Well, I mean, I give this to you as an assignment. You don't have to accept it, of course, but I'm saying.
Hold it, me, my pen. Go on.
The book of Revelations, read it in its entirety.
The entire book of Revelations, yeah.
Yes.
And what to?
Because when you read it, you realize that it really summarizes the modern day.
Can I
prophecy.
ooh, boy, I wish I had these handy. There are some websites out there that, boy, I don't have the URLs. Can you, if you watch the next show, I will make sure they have this information for you. There are websites where back around 1998, 99, when the millennium was about to happen, and there were a lot of claims that the rapture was going to be upon us, Jesus was going to return, because it was a big, scary, round number, right? There were a lot of websites that cataloged all these claims and, noted when the date that was predicted that, it's going to be February 14th, 2000 is going to be the end. And when that day would come and that person who made the claim was wrong, chalk it off. Well, there's one really great site that went backward. They went into historical references, right? People have been predicting the end times are near. Well, since Jesus himself, who told his disciples that standing right there, we're not going to die before it was all finished. Okay.
Before what was all finished.
Don't ask me to quote it exactly.
Yeah,
you will not taste death before the kingdom arrives. It's something like that. It's pretty clear to us. You guys can spin it however you like. It's pretty clear to us. Jesus thought the world was going to end within the lifetimes of the disciples. But even setting aside Jesus, right? Going in the year 120, there were people predicting it was the end, right? When the year 1000 was rolling around, there were people predicting that was going to be the end. All through history, people have looked at the book of Revelations in particular and said, "Ooh, this vague thing that it says here in the book of Revelations, this is hinting at, this is showing, this is just like the thing that's happening now." And they've been wrong for 2,000 years.
You say the vague, it actually gets very detailed.
No. I know enough about the claims in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, we've seen, a big
What about the four-headed dragon thing in there? I mean, there's, well, what about the four-headed dragon?
I don't understand what you want to know about it.
Where
Is
is
there going
it?
to be a four-headed dragon, or is that a metaphor for something? If it's a metaphor for something, there's not literally going to be a four-headed dragon, bashing its way through cities like Godzilla through Tokyo. If there's not really going to be a four-headed dragon, then it's a metaphor, and that means it's vague. It means it's subject to interpretation.
Right, but
Right?
actually, yes, but there.
And that's the kind of stuff that all through history people have been reading in the Book of Revelations
But that's not a
and
metaphor.
leaping to. It's not a metaphor.
Okay, so
then
there's
what is it?
actually going to be a scaly, four-headed dragon that can, tromp around.
I mean, you asked me as a person, and my personal belief is that if
Yeah.
the word says it, it will happen.
Oh, wow,
wow.
because that's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to that.
No, but this is the thing. This is
I
why.
hope they
This
make
is
a
why
movie
I
out
say
of
that.
that.
This is why I say that that's a metaphor. That's not a metaphor.
Okay. All right,
This is
then,
why.
when?
I mean, I don't.
In the next
I,
how many years?
I don't know that. I'm not a prophet.
I know,
Hold on, you're saying the Book of Revelations is showing that it talks about the current times. What, within
See,
100
but the
years?
thing about it is the
Within
Bible also
100
tells
years?
us that the Bible also tells us it says my logic is not your logic, my ways are not your ways. In fact, they're much higher than your ways. I'm paraphrasing, but that's
I'm not buying that. I'm not
so-
buying that if it doesn't make
So
sense. it
even
doesn't
if
make
I were to
sense.
give you a prediction, that would be from my mind, and
Sure,
my mind.
but I'm
is
not
the
asking
mind
for a
of
date.
Christ.
Yeah,
I'm not
and we're-
asking for a date. You know what? Here's how.
And we're giving you a little leeway here.
Let me phrase the question this way, right? You got to have some idea for yourself, right? If the Book of Revelations is talking about our times now, right? You've got to have some idea in your head. Boy, this must mean that it's all gonna, that Jesus is gonna return within X
My
amount of
lifetime.
time,
No,
right?
no.
Whether it's 10 years, 100 years, there's got to be some number. No?
I honestly don't have a number in my head.
Well, then why are you bringing up the Book of Revelations if you don't think it's likely that it's going to occur
I never
even
said I
within
didn't
100
think anything
years?
was unlikely. I just said I don't.
Do you
have
think
a
it is
number.
likely that it'll happen within 100 years?
I'm not saying. I'm not going to take a stand on that point. On that. The
See, that's
number.
the thing. That's the thing. Because that's another thing that I learned reading these historical accounts of claims of the end times that failed.
Mhm.
The people that claimed the end times were upon us, when the date that they claimed was going to happen passed, they never give up the religion. Never, never, never. They never take a good hard look at themselves in the mirror and say, I've been an idiot. I've been believing this stuff, that it was all going to happen real soon, and then when it didn't happen real soon, I just kept on
So wait a
believing.
minute. You believe there's no natural. You believe that there's no supernatural being.
Right.
You believe
We do not believe that there are any.
Now, I'm go out on a limb.
Okay,
I believe
okay.
there's no supernatural beings.
Okay.
You believe? Okay.
Anything you can show me actually exists, I'm going to say it's natural.
I mean, okay. Well, my thing about it is this: if there's no supernatural being,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you get this argument all the time, but
Okay.
if there's nothing in the afterlife, if there's nothing there,
If we just die.
right?
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, because you're taking a gamble, whether you think
Why?
it's a gamble or not.
Oh,
You're
you were
taking a
talking
gamble.
about you're talking about Pascal's wager. Are you familiar with that term?
No, sir.
Okay. The idea that Pascal was a mathematician
Mhm.
and Christian who came up with a relatively famous argument in favor of Christianity called Pascal's wager.
Mhm.
He basically graphs out, right, there's two possibilities. There is a God or there isn't a God. And then there's two choices. You believe in him or you don't believe in him.
Mhm.
And he showed that mathematically, you're better off going ahead and believing that there is one, hoping for the big prize of eternal life, right?
Mhm.
The problem is Pascal's wager doesn't work because there's thousands of different gods that people have claimed over the course of human history.
Mhm.
There's no particular reason to assume that the only one you got to think about is the Christian God. No reason at all. So even if,
and not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but
yeah,
on what you just said, that all the other gods that exist. Well,
no, that people have claimed.
right. That you say that people claim to have existed or do
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
Okay, if you take up that belief or you take it up and say, I'm going to wager, so I'm going to do Pascal's wager, as you said, and I'm going to take one. Now you have to go into a field as a human mind. We have to know, you know what I'm saying? We have to see before we believe. We have to, get a mental logic before we ever just go out on a limb.
But I wish that was true. But clearly, since like over a third of the Earth's population believes in Christianity, clearly a vast majority of people are able to go ahead and believe without any evidence at all.
Well, I mean, that's true. I'm sure that's true.
I wish that we were all really rational and careful about what we believe.
But looking at you now, looking at you as a person, I understand that you like knowledge. You know what I'm saying? That you like.
You don't like knowledge?
No. I mean that you like.
Why are we limiting this to me? Do you like knowledge or don't you?
Yeah, I like knowledge.
Okay.
See, but I mean, I can't do it. No.
It is better to actually believe.
Okay.
Than to just guess.
Looking at me.
All right.
Okay, if I'm going to do this, if I was in your position, I was an atheist and I don't believe in God, but I'm going to do Pascal's wager and I'm going to take up one. I'm going to go research all of the gods. And if you research all of them and look at all of their books, the Quran, the Bible, and all of them, you'll find out that the only one even close to our logic, close to making sense to us, is the God that I serve. God. No, and
So you're saying,
because
didn't you start this by saying you're a minister?
Huh?
Didn't you start this by saying you're a minister, or was that the last caller?
No. Are you a minister?
I'm a minister.
You're a minister. Okay. Isn't that your job to say stuff like that?
No,
I'm not taking your word for it.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. The research. If you actually go in and research, like Buddha. Buddha was
Buddha makes way more sense to me than Christianity.
Really?
Buddhism makes way more sense.
Explain.
Budda was a guy sitting under a tree. He said he thought carefully about stuff. Right? It was not a guy who claimed to be the son of God. He was a guy. Now I know that human beings exist. I don't know that any sons of gods exist. So right there off the bat, I'm way more likely to believe that there even was a Buddha in the first place than I am likely to believe that there was a Jesus.
According to history, he existed, but they reverence him as a god.
Actually,
I've done a little bit of research on this. Some Buddhists do something like that,
Okay.
But a lot of them don't, and his original teachings were nothing like that. In his original teachings, he was just a guy with some advice.
Okay, well, then once you take that angle, the only God that exists is this one, because we call him God, Muslims call him Allah, which is...
No, I'm not buying that either. It's certainly true that there are historical branchings between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? But not between Christianity and the worship of the Norse gods, the Norse pantheon of Odin, Thor, and those guys. And there are still worshipers of those guys if you go to Scandinavia. And probably here in the U.S. too. I'm sure you can find some, but they exist. There are people who still believe that stuff. Just because they're, I think that this is an unfair argument that Christians make a lot. They make this argument, only Christianity makes the most sense. It's easy to say something like that when you're in our culture, where your religion that you're talking about and claiming that's the only one that makes sense is the most common religion in our culture, and everybody's used to it. In countries where they believe that the God is this like dog-headed jackal man, I'm making this up, I don't know if there's any such place, but there's places out there with gods that are wacky, right? Weird, wacky gods like that. Those gods make more sense to those people than your God does to them. Why? Not because their God really makes more sense, or your God really makes less sense, because they're more used to it. That's from the culture they grew up in. And in our culture, we're used to hearing about Jesus. True. But there's a lot of wacky stuff in the Bible. There's talking snakes and all this other stuff. You're telling me there's going to be a four-headed dragon rampaging around the world?
No, I did not say that.
Was that the last guy? I'm sorry.
No, that was me. I said that
you're saying it's not a metaphor.
Literal dragon.
There's literally going to be a four-headed dragon. Isn't that what you said?
Not a dragon, beast.
Okay, beast, a four-headed beast. You're telling me there's literally going to be a four-headed beast rampaging around.
Okay,
now if you want to go back to something like that, again, look at herpetology today. Multicephalism is very, very common in reptiles. Having a two-headed snake is pretty common. So if you just want to go down to a four-headed snake, there are 5 men about there. For the last 5 million
You
years.
know what else? I've heard the argument that only Christianity can be a source of like morality and rules of right and wrong, or that only Christianity can make people happy.
Not true.
Okay, good. I'm glad
good,
you don't take, because that strikes me as the same kind of argument. It's like everybody's used to Christianity, so it seems more natural when you come to people in our culture and say things like that about Christianity. It seems like, well, yeah, but that whole Allah thing seems really out there. But that's only because I wasn't raised in Arabia.
No, actually, Allah is God.
Okay,
Fine.
Well,
I
then
set
Buddhism or
aside
some,
the jackal-headed creature thing that they have in some little country. I mean, I have no experience with that. I've got no familiarity with that. So if you toss, the Christian God and that God in front of me, one of them is going to seem more understandable.
Okay.
But only because of the culture. That's not because the arguments for them make any more
sense. You're
sense.
obviously not biased to our surroundings. You're obviously not biased to them. They don't matter to you.
Well, we try.
No, because I'm saying if Christianity is more comfortable to us to believe, or that it's just a religion that a lot of us just like to take because it's normal, and you're not Christian, obviously you're not affected.
Oh, I am. Oh, no, sure I am.
No, I mean, it doesn't affect you to the point where you feel like you have to believe it.
The only difference is I've recognized it for what it is.
Okay. Now, this is why I say this, because of your arguments, and you know what I'm saying, I really enjoy talking this, but I'm going to end the conversation like this.
Yeah, I think Ashley would probably like the show back, too.
I encourage you to, if you're going to do shows like this, and you're going to, promote atheism and things like this, and try to reach people and show them in your perspective what Christianity really is, or what believing in supernatural being really is. If you're going to expose it for what it is, I encourage you to do it out of knowledge. I encourage you to get a full understanding of it before you do.
What do you think?
That Bible that you have on your desk, I encourage you to actually read it a lot. I'm not saying like you don't read. I'm just saying I encourage you to look at it in its entirety and like actually try to understand it. You know what I'm saying? Because when you do that, you know what I'm saying? That's like a history teacher teaching.
Hold on.
He reads the history book every month.
But hold on. You know what it would prove if I came back on the show next month, because I'm only on once a month. If I came back on the show next month and said, I read this book, I sat down, I read it all the way through between then and now, and I've decided now I believe in the Christian God, you know what that would mean? In an ultimate sense of like proving anything, it would mean nothing. Not anything. Just because somebody reads a book and then they believe something different doesn't prove anything.
I'm not pushing Christianity on you. Is what I'm saying. I'm not going to try to make you be a Christian or try to force you to look at Christianity.
Well, then what's the point of reading it?
Yeah, what was the point of this whole exercise?
If you're going, like I said earlier, I don't knock things until I have a full understanding of them.
I have a full understanding of Christianity. Sir, I have a full understanding of Christianity. I was raised a Christian.
Yeah.
I didn't become an atheist until I was 23. I was well an adult and understood what it was I was being asked to understand.
Yes.
I have a full understanding of Christianity.
Because you were raised in the church doesn't give
No. There is a lot more to it. We've been reading about this stuff for years.
Did it ever occur to you, sir, that somebody could understand your religion and still not buy it?
True.
I understand your religion, and I don't buy it.
Yes.
And I find it insulting I do find it insulting that you think that the only reason I don't agree to be a Christian is because I haven't read your holy book enough.
But you're not understanding what I'm saying. That is not.
Yes, I know. What your point is, and let me just rephrase here just to make sure I'm right here, is if we're going to be on TV saying that Christianity is wrong and, it's got bad things in it, we should read the Bible to at least know the positions. Is that correct?
Come again?
Okay. If we're going to be on TV saying Christianity is wrong, we should read the Bible to at least know the positions.
Right.
Okay. The point there is there are other ways to understand the positions than simply reading the Bible. The Bible is a very convoluted way to get to it. Now, reading it is important. I will grant you that. Actually going back to it and, looking at certain parts of it, very helpful, very useful. No doubt about it. However, there's a lot of other problems with it which aren't directly, it's not in John's 3:29 or something like that. That point is bad or something like that. It's that the whole underpinnings, that there is some omniscient, universe-creating deity out there who created man, got all pissed off at us for whatever reason, sent his son down, made us kill his son so that he could then forgive us for doing the bad things which he knew we were going to do in the first place.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
There are simply logical and philosophical and
but
moral problems with
the
this.
Logic, the thing that you're not understanding is according to my belief, God, his thoughts are higher than, because it makes no sense to you, doesn't mean it didn't make sense.
So then basically we have no way of comprehending it.
No.
Okay.
I object to the very concept that we have to set aside logic as we understand it, because you and people like you claim that there's some better logic that's beyond us, and that makes it true even if it makes no sense to us. I can't believe you have the audacity to make a claim like that. How dare you tell human beings to believe your religion because there's some other better logic that they can't grasp? How dare you?
Until you can
How dare you trick and lie to people like that?
Until you can present
That's disgusting.
Until you can present some other form of logic and some better ways of looking at the world and some better ideas of working with facts, then we have no reason to believe. We have tools of logic and morality and all that kind of stuff to go along with it that make a lot of really good sense. Until someone else presents a different way of looking at it that works better, other than just saying, it works better, trust me, we're going to stick with what we got.
Yeah.
I mean, I
I
understand.
point out, by the way, if there's this higher logic that's beyond us, it's beyond you too, right?
Right.
Well, if it's beyond you too, how do you even know that it exists?
See, because I
How do
have
you
a thing
know?
called faith.
Faith. That's that just going ahead and believing even though it makes no sense, right?
But you're not understanding. I did not.
No, I completely understand
No,
faith.
no, you don't.
Faith is believing even though it doesn't really make any sense.
That's in your perspective.
And now we're back to
faith for
this
us.
special logic, this special secret logic that
Okay.
we can't personally
What
experience.
is your idea of
It
faith?
either makes sense or it doesn't, sir.
Yeah. What is your idea of faith then? If it's not just believing, despite lack of evidence, what is your definition of faith, I guess?
My definition of faith is according to the Bible, faith is evidence.
No,
No.
faith is not evidence. Now, the Bible may say that. Faith is not evidence. Just believing isn't evidence of anything.
Evidence is something.
Because I can show you, I can introduce you to a man down at the sanitarium who believes he is Napoleon, and he's not Napoleon. Believing doesn't make it so.
Okay, but
So if that's what faith is,
well,
you're very deluded.
okay. I mean, this is what I'm.
We're at the core of the issue here now, right? This is the core of the issue. This is what is wrong and sick and twisted about religion in general, and in our society, Christianity in particular. This whole idea that that if you can get yourself to believe, that's proof that it's true. That's nonsense. Just because you can get yourself to believe something doesn't prove a thing. You know what proves things? Actual evidence. Evidence you can look at, show to others, interpret, test, and show that it comes out the same way next time. What science does. That's evidence and proof. Faith is nothing like that. Faith is just believing because you decided you're gonna.
Right, I made the decision, and
And that's fine. You, of course, have a complete freedom to believe whatever you want.
Right,
and I
so
support
you're saying that it's sick and twisted that
I think it's sick and twisted that you're in the business of telling other people to do the same. I think that's sick and twisted.
Why? They have
because
wait. According to you, remember we're all these smart people, and we all have logic. So
and
if they think with the logic, they'll come up with the reason that it's not worth believing in. So why can't I talk about it?
Yeah.
Your job as a minister is to get people.
See, you're speaking out of ignorance. I know.
Your job as a minister is to get people to set aside their logic, like you have told us to do, to set aside their grasp of reality and
No,
believe
I
what you
told
tell
you to
them.
study so you
because
could get a grasp of it. You,
No.
Because if I stood here and I told you to do 30 things, and if I said I was Catholic and I told you to say 40 rosaries and you're forgiven, that would be pushing. I said to read for yourself and get an understanding so that you can distinguish whether it's worth your time or not.
And we explained to you that there was enough stuff. We explained to you there was enough stuff about Christianity to show us. To show any rational person that it's a load of nonsense. Even without reading the book.
Again, going off of what you said, this is why I said to read the Bible. Because going off of what you said, if I ever have an issue with anything, the first thing I want to do is go to the core of the issue. If you're finding out things about Christianity, the first thing you should do is go to the core of Christianity. Go to the Bible.
Yep.
Get a full understanding of the root of Christianity. Get a full understanding of what we understand.
Most of us
by what you was having and surrounding Christianity.
And I
because there's
told
always
you that I
controversy about
understand
everything.
Christianity. And
Yeah.
if you're going to come back to me and tell me I don't, that I must not understand it because I don't agree with you, then I'm going to tell you you're being insulted.
We have read
I
and
was a Christian
studied
long enough to understand what it was I was being taught.
Exactly.
No.
We understand the culture, we understand the beliefs and the ideas and how things work in the Christian worldview and the stories behind it and stuff like that. We understand all of that.
And my point is, my objection to what you do, sir, for a living, is that it is your job to get people to set aside their own grasp of reality. You think it's limited, right? You think there's something better. I don't. I think that a person's understanding of reality is as good as it's going to get.
So
And
if
you're asking them
that's
to
as good
set
as it's
that
going to
aside.
get, then why does it differ so much?
You're asking them to set that aside and believe what your religion teaches, not because of anything you can actually explain.
The Bible says taste and see.
I do want to
Now,
get this point
because
out.
you don't believe in God. You don't believe in God. And because you don't, if you taste and see, because the only thing that can come of that, of you tasting and seeing, if you don't believe in God, is a new level. It's something God proving to you that I exist. That's the only thing that can come of that.
I think I explained earlier that if I had a mystical experience, my first reaction would be that I was...
No, I didn't say mystical experience. I said
that.
God is proving that he exists. God can do that in more ways than appearing.
No, sorry, not to me. I happen to know that the way you prove something is by actually, demonstrating that it exists. Not by innuendo, not by hints, certainly not by setting aside your own reasoning faculties.
Look at this. This is why I said there's a logic that we don't understand.
You cut me off every time I try to make that point.
Okay,
Please let me make my point now. Your job as a minister is to get people to set aside their own grasp of reality and believe what your religion teaches, not because of anything you can really explain, but because of faith. Because you tell them if they can just convince themselves that it's true, then that's proof that it's true. And I think that's terrible.
I didn't tell them anything.
I think that is a terrible thing to do for a living.
Oh, I mean that's the first. This is my thing. Okay, if reality is reality, right? If your mind grasps it as reality, it's reality, right? If you look at something,
actually,
like that test that your arms
Ask that guy down in the sanitarium. He thinks he's Napoleon. Is he?
But that's his reality. If he thinks that it's reality to
Napoleon. Is he Napoleon?
Not to us, but to him he's Napoleon.
And that's reality then? No,
that's reality.
The reality is
see, but
the
you
guy in the
choose to accept a
sanitarium.
different reality.
No, sorry.
No,
There's one reality where stuff actually happens.
Okay, we're gonna go on. Gonna go on to the next call. We thank you for calling, but in our eyes, reality is something objective and outside of your own brain. And so what I see as reality, what you see as reality, and what the guy in the sanitarium sees as reality, while they may be you may be seeing different things, there is an objective one out there.
Yeah, reality is that
we like the
does not
objective
change regardless of what your opinion of it is.
Exactly.
That's what reality is.
So, I just hope that you guys are right, because if you're not, you're going to face a punishment.
Okay, let's not even go there.
And leave with the threat of eternal torment.
No, I didn't say that. No, I said that.
Of course you did.
Listen, hang on. TV@atheist-community.org. If you got more points, send them there. We'll respond to them online. We're going to get on and take the calls.
Not only do you have to set aside
Thanks for
your own
calling.
reasoning faculties, but not only do you have to set aside your own reasoning faculties and believe something he can't prove just because if he can convince you that if you can convince yourself that it's true, it must be. Not only that, but if you don't, then you get to be tortured for eternity. There's the kicker.
Okay, now can I have my pen back?
Yeah.
And we're getting you the decaf next
And the
week.
show.
Last week, in case you forgot about it or weren't here, we had a nice long call from a minister and had some information on that. It was a nice long call. Jeff took him on and basically hogtied him. The two things that we had, though, one was he was bringing up that Revelations, it shows that there are so many things that are going on right now that ties up. You can match them all to what's going on today, and Revelations is not filled with metaphors. It says it explicitly what's going to happen. Two things. One, there is a website, A Brief History of the Apocalypse. People have been reading over Revelations and other means of trying to figure out the end times for centuries now. And A Brief History of the Apocalypse goes over some of those. It's, like I say, it's called A Brief History of the Apocalypse. The website is just the first letter of that, abhota.info. Briefhistoryoftheapocalypse.info. And the first one, and it's got hundreds on the site, but the first one starts at around 280 BC, was the predicted time that the world was going to go poof. And then it's got another one for 634 BC, 389 BC, the 1st century, 2nd century, and it goes all the way up until today, and including some that are supposedly happening soon, and some that are happening in the future. So now soon means pretty much anything, whatever they say. Somebody said it was soon, and that was in the 1950s. So take whatever you want for a definition of that. Also, again, he was saying that Revelation should be taken literally. It's not a metaphor. It's not, anything like that. If it says it, that's what's going to happen. So, and we were talking about the four-headed beast that was going to come back and rampage cities. Well, it isn't four, it's actually seven-headed beast. So, so our caller, again, who was a minister, could have been brushed up on that a little better. But we missed that also, so. So anyway, keep your eyes peeled on CNN for the seven-headed beast, which will be rampaging around somewhere soon.
The two issues converge here. One is the question, what do we want to accomplish? What do we reasonably think we can accomplish? And then this article of faith that I think circulates, unfortunately, among people of our viewpoint, that you can't argue anyone out of their beliefs. I mean, is this a completely fatuous exercise, or can we actually win a war of ideas with people? And I think, certainly judging from my email, we can't. I mean, I'm constantly getting email from people who have lost their faith and, in effect, been argued out of it. And the straw that broke that camel's back was either one of our books or some other process of reasoning or incompatibility of what they knew to be true and what they were told by their faith, that I think we have to just highlight the fact that it's possible for people to be shown the contradictions internal to their faith, or the contradiction between their faith and what we've come to know to be true about the universe, and they just, the process can take minutes or months or years, but they have to renounce their superstition in the face of what they now know to be true.
I was having an argument with a very sophisticated biologist who's a brilliant expositor of evolution, and he still believes in God. And I said, how can you, what's this all about? And he said, I accept all your rational arguments, however, it's faith. And then he said this very significant phrase to me, there's a reason that it's called faith. He said it very decisively, very almost aggressively. There's a reason that it's called faith. And that was to him the absolute knockdown clincher. You can't argue with it because it's faith. And he said it proudly and defiantly, rather than in any sort of apologetic way.
You know, you get it all the time in North America from people who say you've got to read William James and have had to be able to judge other people's subjective experiences, which is something that's by definition impossible to do.
Right.
If it's real to them, why can't you respect it? I mean, this wouldn't be accepted in any other field of argument at all. The impression people are under is the
Yes.
critical thing about them. I had a debate with a very senior Presbyterian in Orange County. I asked him, because we were talking about biblical literalism, of which he wasn't an exponent, but I said, well, what about the graves opening at the time of the crucifixion according to St. Matthew? Matthew, I'd rather say. And everyone getting out of their graves in Jerusalem, walking around greeting old friends in the city. I was going to ask him, doesn't that rather cheapen the idea of the resurrection of Jesus? But he mistook my purpose. He wanted to know if I believed that had happened. That was what he thought.
Right.
And he said that as a historian, which he also was, he was inclined to doubt it.
Right.
But that as a Presbyterian minister, he thought it was true. I thought, well, all right then.
How many personalities do we have?
I'm seriously, for me, it was enough that I got him to say that.
Right.
I said, in that case, I'll rest my case.
Yeah.
I don't want to say any more to you now. You've said all I could say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's one other chip I'd like to put on the table here. There's this phenomenon of someone like Francis Collins, or the biologist you just mentioned, someone who obviously has enough of the facts on board, enough of a scientific education to know better, and still does not know better, or professes not to know better. And I think we have a cultural problem where, and this was actually brought home to me at one talk I gave. A physics professor came up to me at the end of the talk and told me that he had brought one of his graduate students who was a devout Christian and who was quite shaken by my talk, and all I got of this report was that this was the first time his faith had ever really been explicitly challenged. And so there's something about that. It's true to say that you can go through the curriculum of becoming a scientist and never have your faith explicitly challenged because it's taboo to do so. And now we have engineers who can build nuclear bombs in the Muslim world who still think it's plausible metaphysics that you can get to paradise and get 72 virgins. And we have people like Francis Collins who think that on Sunday you can kneel down in the dewy grass and give yourself to Jesus because you're in the presence of a frozen waterfall, and on Monday you can be a physical geneticist.
Well, according to our friend, the great Pervez Hudboy, the great Pakistani physicist, there are people who think you can use the jinns, the devils, and harness their power for the reactor.
It's almost tempting to fund such a project.
Yeah, and it seems, and I gather that, again, I can't get over him still, the respected Tariq Ramadan of St. Anthony's College, Oxford, says in his book, I'm told, that he believes in jinns too.
Right.
I hope I'm not doing him an injustice. I've been told that in his book, In the Steps of the Prophet, he says as much. So one is up against things that are flat out primitive and superstitious.
I think it may be easier than we're supposing to shake people's faith. There's been a moratorium on this for a long time. We're just the beginning of a new wave of explicit attempts to shake people's faith, and it's bearing fruit. And the obstacles, it seems to me, are not that we don't have the facts or the arguments. It's these strategic reasons for not professing it, not admitting it. Not admitting it to yourself, not admitting it in public, because your family is going to view it as a betrayal. You're just embarrassed to admit that you were taken in by this for so long. It takes, I think, tremendous courage to just declare that you've given that all up. And if we can find ways to help people find that courage and give them some examples of people who have done this, and they're doing just fine. They may have lost the affections of a parent or something like that. They may have hurt some family members, but still, I think it's a good thing to encourage. And I don't think we should assume that we can't do this. I think we can.
Yes, it's almost patronising to suggest that we couldn't, and suggest that it shouldn't, that it's not. On the other hand, I think we all know people who seem to manage this kind of split brain feat of, as Sam said, believing one thing on a Sunday and then something totally contradictory or incompatible in the rest of the week. And there's nothing, I suppose, neurologically wrong with that. I mean, there's no reason why one shouldn't have a brain that's split in that. that kind of
But
way.
but it is unstable in a certain way. But
Yeah.
and I'm sure you're right that people do this and they're very good at it, and they do it by deflecting attention from it.
Yeah.
And let's start.
But how you can live with it?
Let's start focusing attention.
How can you
Let's-
live with a contradiction in your?
By not by forgetting that you're doing this and by not attending to it. I think what I would love to do is to invent a memorable catchphrase or term that would rise unbidden in their minds when they caught themselves doing it. And then they would think, oh, this is one of those
Yes.
cosmic shifts that
Yes.
that Dennett and Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens are talking about. Oh, right, and they think this is somehow illicit. Just to create a little more awareness in them of what a strange thing it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say that I think that cognitive dissonance is probably necessary for everyday survival. Everyone does it a bit.
You mean tolerating cognitive dissonance?
No, practicing.
Actually practicing it.
Practicing. I mean, I don't know, take the case of someone who's a member of MoveOn.org. They think the United States government is a brutal, militaristic, imperial regime that crushes the poor and invades other people's countries. They don't. They send their children to school. They do their stuff. You know, they don't act all the time as if 10% of what they believe is true.
Right.
Yeah.
Partly because it would be impossible. Say with people in the 50s who, members of the John Birch Society, who thought President Eisenhower was a communist. Okay, you get up in the morning, you believe that. The White House is run by the Kremlin, but then you have to go and get the groceries.
Right. Right.
And do all that.
Yes, why don't you
You still have to go and do
Too
it.
many commitments. Yeah.
Yeah, but you absolutely wouldn't be challengeable in your belief. It would be very, very important to you. There would be no way in your life, your real life, of vindicating or practicing the opinion that you have. And I'm sure that the same is true of people who say, well, I shouldn't really prefer one child to another or one parent to another, but I do. I'm just not going to act as if I do.
Right.
All kinds of things of this kind.
But what do you think as
Or
educators?
Senator Craig saying he's not gay. I'm thinking in his own mind, he's absolutely sure he's not.
Right. Yeah.
But he can't manage his life by saying he is, or that he isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a question I wanted to ask was this: we should ask ourselves what our real objective is.
Yeah.
Do we in fact wish to see a world without faith? I think I would have to say that I don't. I don't either expect to or wish to see that.
What do you mean by
I don't
faith?
think it's possible because it replicates so fast, faith, as often as it's cut down or superseded or discredited. It replicates, it seems to me, extraordinarily fast, I think for Freudian reasons, principally to do with fear of extinction.
So you mean faith in supernatural paradigms?
Wish.
But why would you not wish it?
Wish thinking. And then the other thing is, would I want this argument to come to an end? With all having
You wouldn't like
conceded
to
that
retire and move on
Hitchens
to
really
other
won that round. Now
Yeah.
nobody in the world believes in God. Now, apart from being unable to picture this, but I'm not completely certain that it's what I want. I think it is rather to be considered as sort of the foundation of all arguments about epistemology, philosophy, biology, and so on. That it's the thing you have to always to be arguing against. The other
It's an
explanation.
extraordinary thing. I don't understand what you're saying. I mean, I understand you're saying that it'll never work, but I don't understand why you wouldn't wish it.
Because I think as a bit like the argument of the argument between, Huxley and Darwin. Huxley and Wilberforce, or Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. I want it to go on.
Because it's interesting.
I want our side to get more refined and theirs to be ever more exposed. But I can't see it with one hand clapping.
But you don't want it to go on with the jihadists. I mean, there's a certain face of this.
No, but I don't have a difference of opinion with the jihadists.
Well, you do in terms of the legitimacy of their project.
No, not really. No, there's nothing to argue about with that. I mean, there's a simple matter of survival. I want them to be extirpated.
Or then move it down to the people who are blocking stem cell.
That's a purely primate response with me. They're recognizing the need to destroy an enemy in order to assure my own survival. I've no interest at all in what
But it sounds like you're
no, I mean,
like
really, we haven't still come to your question about Islam, but no interest at all in what they think. Only interested in refining methods of destroying them.
In other words, you've simply
A
given up.
task in which, by the way, one gets very little secular support.
Yes,
Most
yeah,
atheists
notable,
don't
yeah.
want this fight.
Yeah.
The most important one is the one they want to shirk. They'd far rather go off
Well-
and dump on Billy Graham.
Well,
Because
I
on
think
that they know that they can't,
I
there's
think
no danger.
I think that because we find the idea of exterminating these people just abhorrent, and we think that besides it will
No, I
it
said
will breed them
extirpate.
extirpate.
Complete destruction of the jihadist forces. Extermination, I think, has to be applied more as a species or to.
No, but Christopher,
Well,
going back to your thing about, it sounds as though you like argument, you like having, it's almost the theatre
It's
of having an
possible.
intellectual argument which would be lost.
Well, I would rather say the dialectic, actually, Richard. In other words, one learns from arguing with other people.
Yes.
And I think all of us around this table have probably enhanced or improved our own capacities as reasoners.
Yes,
in
but,
this-
but I
in
mean,
this
there are plenty of
context.
other things to reason about. You can
Yeah.
having won the battle against religion, we can go back to science or whatever it is
Yes.
we practice, and we can argue and reason about that. And there's plenty of arguments, and really worthwhile
But
arguments. to
it'll
be-
always be the case that some will attribute their presence here to the laws of biology, and others will attribute their presence here to a divine plan that has a scheme for them.
Well, that's
And you
your-
can tell a lot, in my view, about people from which view they take. And as we all know, only one of those views makes sense. But how do we know that? Because we have to contrast it with the opposite one,
But let me make an
which is not
analogy
going
here.
to disappear.
Because you could have said the same thing about witchcraft at some point
Yeah.
in recent history. You could say that every culture has had a belief in witches, a belief in the efficacy of magic spells. Witchcraft is ubiquitous, and we're never going to get rid of it, and we're fools to try. Or we can try only as a matter of dialectic. But witchcraft is going to be with us.
Well,
And yet witchcraft has almost without exception. I mean, you can find certain communities.
Not
where-
at all. Not at all.
No, I mean, real witchcraft, not witchcraft as
Witchcraft
in
is
its
completely
religious way.
ineradicable, it spreads like weed, often under animist and Christian.
No, I don't think
not in Western
I mean,
Washington
frank
Post,
witchcraft.
the
Witchcraft
Washington
of the
Post-
evil eye, and instead of medicine, you have.
You think you've got rid of that?
I think we've got. Fundamentally, we've got rid of that. Yes.
But in any case, don't you
Not
want to
at
get
all.
rid of it? I mean,
Not at all. There's currently a campaign to get Wiccans registered to be buried in Arlington Cemetery.
Well,
Oh, but
Modulo the
Wiccans are to
Yeah, they're not-
witchcraft as
and,
Unitarians are.
Right. They're not real. I'm talking
Calm
about.
down.
I'm talking about a willingness to kill your neighbor because you think that there is some causal mechanism by which they, through their evil intent, could have destroyed your crops psychically, or cast an evil eye upon your. It comes in ignorance
yes.
of medical science. I mean, you don't know why people get sick, and you suspect your neighbor of ill intent, and then witchcraft fills the void there.
No, one wouldn't say in such a case that one wished to be, one didn't wish to be without it. That we've lost something.
But we are effectively. I mean, we're not dealing with the claims of witches intruding upon medical. And don't go to alternative medicine and acupuncture here. I'm talking about real witchcraft.
Well, I was
medieval
about to do that very thing.
Yeah.
And the Washington Post publishes horoscopes every day.
astrology is yet another matter.
But
you think-
astrology is a
Let's take a moment.
pale.
Astrology is not going to be eradicated. Believe
Okay,
me.
well, but it
People have to
doesn't
stop
need to be
reading horoscopes.
no, but you're confusing whether it's going to be eradicated and whether you want it to be eradicated. And it sounds as though you don't want it to be eradicated because you want something to argue against and something to sharpen
Yes,
your
I
wits on.
think that is in fact what I.
But in fact, instead of thinking about eradication, why not think about it the way an evolutionary epidemiologist would and say, what we want to do is we want to encourage the evolution of avirulence. We want to get rid of the harmful kinds. And I mean, I don't care about astrology. I don't think it's harmful enough. I mean, it was a little scary when Reagan was reportedly using astrology to make decisions. But that, I hope, anomalous case aside, I find the superstition that astrology is important to be relatively harmless. If we could only do the same thing, if we could only relegate the other enthusiasms to the status of astrology, I'd be happy.
Right.
Well, look, you don't accept my, or you don't